Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Just a reminder to please put your cell phones on silent. My name is Manata Hashemi, and I'm the Farzana Family Assistant Professor of Iranian Studies at the Department of International and Area Studies here at OU. Tonight's discussion marks the first event for the newly established center, Farzana Family Center for Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies at the University of Oklahoma's College of International Studies. A big thank you to Mohammad and Jalal Farzaneh for their generous support of this event, and to the event organizers, including Marjan Serafipour, our Persian language instructor, Rhonda Hill, assistant to the chair, Stephanie Sager, our event coordinator, and thank you to our graduate and undergraduate students, student organizers, Kevin Pope, Libya Nenga, and Daniel Jibreli. As many of you may know, the Iranian Studies program at the College of International Studies has been active for the past 5 years with the appointment of Dr. Afshin Marashi as the chair and director. The program currently offers rich courses on Iran and has been leading a very vibrant Iranian Studies Persian language program. We also now have an undergraduate student journal, Danish, that has recently begun publication. Last spring, thanks to a very generous multi-million-dollar donation by the Farzaneh Family Foundation, led by Mohammad and Jalal Farzaneh, the program has now expanded into a center. The establishment of the center will now pave the way for 3 additional endowed professorships in Persian language and literature, in Persian art and music, and in U.S.-Iran relations. The center will also establish a major in Iranian studies at the University of Oklahoma, and it will help fund scholarships for students interested in the study of Iran. The center will also create a prize for Persian literature and help to expand the university's Persian book and artwork collection. And last but certainly not least, the newly established center will have an endowed lectureship, the first of which is tonight's lecture and discussion. Tonight's discussion on Iran and the world by Ambassador Sayed Hossein Mousavian is especially timely and important given the current nuclear agreement between Iran and the US and the upcoming US presidential elections. We're honored to have the ambassador with us here tonight. Ambassador Mousavian is currently an associate research scholar at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. He's also a former diplomat who, among his many roles, served as Iran's ambassador to Germany, as head of the Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council, as spokesman for Iran in its 2003 to 2005 nuclear negotiations with the European Union, and as foreign policy advisor to the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran. Ambassador Mousavian is also a widely published author, with his articles appearing in numerous prestigious journal and media outlets, including The Guardian, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and Foreign Policy. Ambassador Mousavian's most recent book, Iran and the United States, An Insider's View on the Failed Past and the Road to Peace, was published in 2014 and explores pathways for rapprochement between the two countries. Joining Ambassador Mousavian tonight is our very own Dr. Samer Shahata, who is Associate Professor of Middle East Politics in the Department of International and Area Studies at OU, and a specialist in U.S. foreign policy toward the Middle East. Dr. Shahata previously taught at Georgetown, NYU, and Columbia Universities, and has spent the last academic year at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies in Doha, Qatar. A prolific author, his research has appeared in numerous prestigious journals, as well as in the form of several books, including his most recent book entitled Islamist Politics in the Middle East. Dr. Shahata is also a renowned contributor to various newspaper and media outlets, including the New York Times, the BBC, the International Herald Tribune, and Al Jazeera. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Sayed Hossein Mousavian and Dr. Samer Shahata, who will begin tonight's panel discussion. And as a reminder, there's also a reception and book signing following the discussion, so please do join us for that. Thank you.
Please. Please. Thank you. Well, thank you, Professor Hashemi, for that introduction. And I'd like to welcome all of you, and particularly the ambassador, to the College of International Studies at the University of Oklahoma. It's very nice having you here, and I hope that it'll be an interesting dialogue, not only between us, but also between people in the audience. Because, of course, there are a number of issues, I think, that are pressing, having to do not only with the nuclear agreement that I think it would be worthwhile hearing your opinion on, but since the nuclear agreement has dominated, I think, coverage of U.S.-Iranian relations over the last several years, and since it has been now, I think, a year and a month or so since the agreement was activated, who got the better of the deal, in your opinion, right? I mean, we saw $400 million being transported to Iran recently, right? There's talk of $50 billion to $100 billion that has or will make its way to Iran as a result of the lifting of sanctions and so on. And the question then becomes is what has the United States gotten in return and what has Iran gotten? Because it seems that some in Iran also are questioning how successful and how impactful the deal has been in terms of a flourishing of the Iranian economy. So that's, I think, my first question.
Hello to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Farzana Family Center for Iran and Persian Gulf Studies to invite me here. I would like to thank all colleagues at the center, and especially Muhammad and Jalal, who founded the center. I also want to thank all of you to accept the invitation to have such a discussion tonight, and all authorities of Oklahoma University. Samer, I think it has been known, this deal, as a win-win. The reason they say win-win is because the world powers, they got two big concessions on the deal. One is all pathways to nuclear bomb are closed. Second is the fact that deal contains the most intrusive inspections, transparency measures at the highest level of international rules, regulations, protocols, treaties. Therefore, with this deal, all objective guarantees are there that Iranian nuclear program would remain forever peaceful. This is a win deal also for Iranians because they were fighting for their legitimate rights under NPT for peaceful nuclear technology. NPT is Non-Proliferation Treaty, the main and the only nuclear treaty internationally exists. And it was the US for decades opposing the rights of Iran. After revolution, the US opposed Iran even to have one civilian nuclear power plant, which was built during the Shah. 90% was finished. Iran paid about $8 billion to Germans. It had just 10% to be finished. However, under this deal, Iranians, they have the rights like other members of NPT for peaceful nuclear technologies, including enrichment. The second win for the Iranians is the fact all nuclear-related sanctions have been lifted, and they have agreed to be lifted. Therefore, two big concessions for Iranians, two big concessions for the big powers. I believe beyond this deal between the P5+1, 5 permanent member of United Nations Security Council and Germany, with Iran, I should say the deal is the most comprehensive agreement ever reached on non-proliferation during the history of nuclear. Therefore, if the deal, it does not, the deal does not limit to Iran. If the world powers continue to globalize the principles of this deal, definitely we would reach world free from nuclear weapon, which is the ideal for international community, for the world powers. The US also have said many times, Obama repeated that the US is trying for world free from nuclear weapon. If they really want, this is the deal, because it is 170 pages, the most detailed technically ever discussed and agreed between the nuclear scientists of 5 big powers, sitting for days and days, months and months to discuss how to prevent a nuclear bomb. Therefore, I believe this is a win for everybody.
So to move backwards a little bit, so you spoke about Iran's nuclear program and the peaceful intentions of the nuclear program. And this is not only an academic question, but I think this is a question that was animated the international community's concern about Iran's nuclear program. So Iran has always maintained that the program initially was for peaceful generation of power. But of course, there was a history of deception with regard to monitoring. And so, was it really the case that before the discovery of Iran's secret nuclear program that the intention was only peaceful nuclear energy? Or did Iran want to have either nuclear capability, that is the ability to produce a weapon relatively quick, right, or to produce nuclear weapons?
Yes and no. It's important to know it was the United States of America who laid the foundation of nuclear Iran. It was not Islamic Republic. Before revolution, from 1950s, under the program of Atom for Peace, the US decided complete fuel cycle for Iran. It was the US plan 1975, 1974 that Iran should have 20 nuclear power plants by 1994. It was Gerald Ford's decision for Iran to have full fuel cycle, enrichment, everything. Europeans, Americans, they were competing to win the lucrative nuclear projects in Iran. Americans, they were fighting for nuclear projects. Germans, French, Brits, everybody was fighting to get projects, nuclear projects. Revolution happened. I really don't know why. But the fact is, the revolutionaries, right after revolution, decided to forego all nuclear projects. They said, this is imperialism program, this is US program, we don't want it. They decided not to have heavy water, they decided not to have enrichment, they decided not to have 20 nuclear power plants, they decided only to have whatever is there. It was one Tehran research reactor built by Americans in 1967.
General Electric, maybe? I think, yeah.
And the second one was Bushehr nuclear power plant signed between Iran and Germany in 1975, which I said already Iran paid $8 billion to Germany. It was 90% finished. They had to finish the 10% after revolution. And it was Iran-France agreement, which Iran paid already during Shah, $1.2 billion to France to have a joint venture for production of uranium in France, not in Iran, because Iran was going to have enrichment plant in Iran, also to have access to international fuel market. Therefore, they signed a separate agreement with France. They paid 1.2 billion to get fuel from France. After revolution, Iranians, they canceled all contracts, everything. They told Germans only finish, because you got the money, finish the 10% for the only nuclear power plant. And they told France, you can send the fuel for the only nuclear power plant. That's it. We don't want anything else. The US stood against Iran. You can see the double standard before 1979 and after 1970. Just right after revolution, it had nothing happened about Israel, Hezbollah, it was nothing. Just a revolution happened. Then the US told France, you cannot send fuel for Iran. Told Germans, you cannot give them nuclear power plant. You cannot complete it. And from mid-1980 this summer, I was responsible for relation with Europe in Iranian Foreign Ministry. For 10 years, I was involved in negotiation with Europeans. I was telling them, look, we have one nuclear power plant. You got the money. Finish it. And then we would get the fuel from France. That's it. Otherwise, Iranians would have to go for self-sufficiency to produce fuel inside Iran. They were telling us, Iranians, they can never have such a capability to produce fuel. It is impossible. It's a very high-level technology, and you are bluffing. After 15 years, US denying the very, very preliminary rights of Iran for just one nuclear power plant and access to international market. Iranians then, they decided to go for self-sufficiency. They had no other choice. In mid-1990s, they decided to go for having fuel cycle. They had to go confidentially, secretly, because definitely no one in the world was ready to cooperate with Iran on their NPT for peaceful nuclear technology for Iran to have fuel cycle. The US pushed China to withdraw from Iran. The US pushed Argentina to withdraw from Iran. Every country the US pushed to withdraw from Iran on the nuclear. Therefore, Iranians, they had to keep secret because of the US pressure on everyone. In 2003, ultimately, the international community discovered that Iran has mastered enrichment. And they were shocked. The crisis started when they discovered Iran has mastered. But why Iran mastered enrichment? They were saying nuclear bomb. We were telling them for 15 years, if you give us finish the Bushehr power plant, if you give us let's say, the deal is the most comprehensive agreement ever reached on non-proliferation during the history of nuclear. Therefore, if the deal, it does not, the deal does not limit to Iran. If the world powers continue to globalize the principles of this deal, definitely we would reach world free from nuclear weapon, which is the ideal for international community, for the world powers. The US also have said many times, Obama repeated that the US is trying for world free from nuclear weapon. If they really want, this is the deal, because it is 170 pages, the most detailed, technically, ever discussed and agreed between the nuclear scientists of 5 big powers, sitting for days and days, months and months, to discuss how to prevent a nuclear bomb. Therefore, I believe this is a win for everybody.
So to move backwards a little bit, so you spoke about Iran's nuclear program and the peaceful intentions of the nuclear program. And this is not only an academic question, but I think this is a question that was animated the international community's concern about Iran's nuclear program. So Iran has always maintained that the program initially was for peaceful generation of power. But of course, there was a history of deception with regard to monitoring. And so, was it really the case that before the discovery of Iran's secret nuclear program that the intention was only peaceful nuclear energy? Or did Iran want to have either nuclear capability, that is the ability to produce a weapon relatively quick, right, or to produce nuclear weapons?
Yes and no. It's important to know it was the United States of America who laid the foundation of nuclear Iran. It was not Islamic Republic. Before revolution, from 1950s, under the program of Atom for Peace, the US decided complete fuel cycle for Iran. It was the US plan 1975, 1974 that Iran should have 20 nuclear power plants by 1994. It was Gerald Ford's decision for Iran to have full fuel cycle, enrichment, everything. Europeans, Americans, they were competing to win the lucrative nuclear projects in Iran. Americans, they were fighting for nuclear projects. Germans, French, Brits, everybody was fighting to get projects, nuclear projects. Revolution happened. I really don't know why. But the fact is, the revolutionaries, right after revolution, decided to forego all nuclear projects. They said, this is imperialism program, this is US program, we don't want it. They decided not to have heavy water, they decided not to have enrichment, they decided not to have 20 nuclear power plants, they decided only to have whatever is there. It was one Tehran research reactor built by Americans in 1967.
General Electric, maybe? I think, yeah.
And the second one was Bushehr nuclear power plant signed between Iran and Germany in 1975, which I said already Iran paid $8 billion to Germany. It was 90% finished. They had to finish the 10% after revolution. And it was Iran-France agreement, which Iran paid already during Shah, $1.2 billion to France to have a joint venture for production of uranium in France, not in Iran, because Iran was going to have enrichment plant in Iran, also to have access to international fuel market. Therefore, they signed a separate agreement with France. They paid $1.2 billion to get fuel from France. After revolution, Iranians, they canceled all contracts, everything. They told Germans only finish, because you got the money, finish the 10% for the only nuclear power plant. And they told France, you can send the fuel for the only nuclear power plant. That's it. We don't want anything else. The US stood against Iran. You can see the double standard before 1979 and after 1970. Just right after revolution, it had nothing happened about Israel, Hezbollah, it was nothing. Just a revolution happened. Then the US told France, you cannot send fuel for Iran. Told Germans, you cannot give them nuclear power plant. You cannot complete it. And from mid-1980 this summer, I was responsible for relation with Europe in Iranian foreign ministry. For 10 years, I was involved in negotiation with Europeans. I was telling them, look, we have one nuclear power plant. You got the money. Finish it. And then we would get the fuel from France. That's it. Otherwise, Iranians would have to go for self-sufficiency to produce fuel inside Iran. They were telling us, Iranians, they can never have such a capability to produce fuel. It is impossible. It's a very high-level technology, and you are bluffing. After 15 years, US denying the very, very preliminary rights of Iran for just one nuclear power plant and access to international market. Iranians then, they decided to go for self-sufficiency. They had no other choice. In mid-1990s, they decided to go for having fuel cycle. They had to go confidentially, secretly, because definitely no one in the world was ready to cooperate with Iran on their NPT for peaceful nuclear technology for Iran to have fuel cycle. The US pushed China to withdraw from Iran. The US pushed Argentina to withdraw from Iran. Every country the US pushed to withdraw from Iran on the nuclear. Therefore, Iranians, they had to keep secret because of the US pressure on everyone. In 2003, ultimately, the international community discovered that Iran has mastered enrichment. A fuel for Tehran research reactor built by Americans. If you give us fuel for Bushehr power plant built by Germans, we are not going to have anything else. But when they said no, they pushed Iran for self-sufficiency. When Iran, it's really interesting, when Iran mastered enrichment, then the US said, look, stop enrichment. Now you can have fuel. Now you can have power plant. Now we can have everything. It was late because 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, Iranians, they have invested, scientists, nuclear investment. Now they have mastered their own enrichment. They could have their own fuel. You cannot push them to buy from outside. It was for 1 decade challenge on the enrichment. And the US, world powers, they were suspicious whether Iran wants the enrichment for bomb or for peaceful nuclear technology. At the end, the deal agreed in 2015, it was the same deal. I was member of nuclear negotiation team in 2003 to 2005. In 2005, we proposed the same deal to Europeans, the same principles. But the US declined. The US said zero enrichment. That's why we couldn't get a deal. They agreed in 2015 because the US red line moved from zero enrichment to zero nuclear bomb. Iranians never had problem with zero nuclear bomb.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this technically, but I do think it's interesting because, I'm supposedly trained as a political scientist, and that means that I'm quite skeptical about people, but particularly states. So nothing against Iran, but if I was an Iranian official in 2000, and in fact, I don't need to say this myself, Bruce Riedel, who was a 30-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon and on the National Security Council, Bruce Riedel is on record as saying that if he was an advisor to the Supreme Leader in the mid-2000s, in a context in which the United States was doing regime change in Iraq, having 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, with Pakistan as a nuclear neighbor close by, Russia a nuclear neighbor, Israel an enemy nuclear neighbor, I would advise the Supreme Leader to go
For nuclear bomb.
nuclear bomb. And so I think it's interesting to think about this. There's nothing wrong with that. It wouldn't be a bad admission if you told us here at the University of Oklahoma that we really wanted a nuclear bomb, but we settled for nuclear energy. Don't worry, we're not going to, there's no one from the New York Times here. But it is interesting to me, that would be the rational thing to do.
There is one big difference, Samer, about what you are thinking and what Iranians are thinking. If they wanted to develop nuclear bomb, they could do it. I promise you, they could do it. Europe, the US could never imagine Iranians would master enrichment. They did. I remember when Ahmadinejad, I was here in the US at Princeton University when Ahmadinejad came to New York and said, we are ready to stop going to enriching to 20% if you give us fuel for Tehran research reactor, because fuel for Tehran research reactor, you have to have 20% enrichment. That time, Iran had enrichment below 5%. The US rejected. When I was talking to European American friends, I told them, accept it. They said, Hussein, it's impossible. Going from 3.67% of enrichment to 20%, this is the most sophisticated technology. Iranians would never be able to have it. That's why we believe Ahmadinejad is bluffing. Just within 4 months, they did enrichment 20%. Within 4 months, they were shocked how they could do it. If they wanted nuclear bomb, Samer, they would have made. No one could prevent them. But I need to remind you a very, very important historical fact as evidence. You remember during war, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons. Unfortunately, material and technology was provided by the US and Europeans. They gave Saddam Hussein to use chemical weapons, the weapons of mass destruction against Iranians. About 100,000 Iranians, they were either killed or injured. It was not like 9/11, 3,000 or 4,000. It was 100,000 Iranians, victim of chemical weapon provided by US and Europeans, used by Saddam. Defense Ministry of Iran, they went to the late Ayatollah Khomeini, the first leader. And they told him, we are in position to make chemical weapon to reciprocate. They wanted permission. He said, weapons of mass destruction from the Shia religious point of view is haram, is forbidden, is genocide. You cannot have. My point is here, Samir, when a nation during war is attacked by chemical weapon, 100,000 of its citizens killed or injured, is not responding with chemical weapon because of religious values, not because of NPT or chemical weapon conventions. It is the best objective guarantees that they really don't want it.
It was a bloody war, and Iran and Iraq responded in all different kinds of terrible ways, but I understand the point. Okay. So,
nuclear done.
Oh, well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. Moving on to the next issue. So the nuclear deal, has been done for a year and so on, but we just read a month ago that Ayatollah Khamenei is kind of skeptical that the benefits have really come to Iran, right? The money isn't flowing in, that is the money of investment and so on. The economy doesn't seem to have gotten any better. And it seems that, there's the same skeptics towards the possibility of cooperation or resolution of conflicts on other fronts between the US and Iran. So, has Iran felt the kind of economic and other side positive effects of the nuclear agreement?
See,
And
The
wasn't that,
sanctions legally are lifted, the nuclear-related sanctions. The UN sanctions, the US nuclear unilateral sanctions, European nuclear unilateral sanctions. Iranians, definitely they have benefited. When you said 400 million or 50 billion, this is Iranian money, was blocked. Nobody has donated even $1 to Iran because of JCPOA. This is their own money. But also they have been able to export their oil from 1 million to over 2 million barrels. Now they are with their OPEC quota. They have been able to increase the production of oil. There are a lot of new willingness from Japanese, Europeans on huge industrial cooperation with Iran. About 30, 40, 50 billion dollars of new industrial agreement have been signed with Iran. However, there is a big problem. The US has blocked the dollar U-turn, the transition of dollar. All international deals, agreements needs banking transactions. And normally it is in dollar. And the US has blocked it. Therefore, this is a big block from the US side for the complete, precise, full implementation of the nuclear deal. And it is not Ayatollah Khamenei who is complaining. This is Europeans are complaining to Americans. This is Japanese, South Koreans, Indians, Chinese. Everybody is complaining the US is not complying with its commitment within nuclear deal.
just to be clear about this, and of course you know more about the specifics on this than I do, but it's my understanding that the deal allows Iran access to international financial institutions, including the sale in dollars or purchases of dollars, but does not allow Iran access to American financial institutions.
Iranians, they don't want American financial institutions.
But that would mean
Europeans, they want to do the deal. They need to use dollar. The dollar is coming to New York and come back. It is, therefore, the US cannot prevent European business with Iran because of its own sanctions. It is a consensus between the other P5 plus members, Europeans, Chinese, Russians, that this is the fault of US. Everybody is blaming the US. Of course, Obama, Kerry, they have promised to resolve it. They don't say no. They say, yes, we are trying to do, and they are trying, but still it is not resolved. That's why Ayatollah Khamenei is saying you cannot trust the US. This is the deal. 5 powers they have signed. United Nations Security has approved. We have implemented all our commitments. It's important. Iranians, they have complied, they have implemented all their commitments within the nuclear deal, 100% done, and now is in problem because of the US.
So, of course, the US-Iranian file, or the relationship, is multifaceted. It's not only the nuclear issue, right? I mean, there are many other serious divisions between the United States and Iran. And so I think the next kind of topic or question I want to ask is about, okay, the nuclear issue now hopefully is off the table, but it still seems that there are major differences regarding, for example, Syria and the continuing support of the Bashar al-Assad regime, which is really a killing machine, right, on the part of the Iranian regime. I mean, I think there have been maybe a dozen Iranian generals who have been killed fighting in Syria, not to mention thousands of members of the Revolutionary Guard. I don't know if the figure in terms of financial support has been $1 billion or more, and so on. So Syria still is something that separates in a very serious way Iran and the United States. And then, of course, there's the issue of what is called the support for terrorist groups, and specifically Hezbollah. And so, there are two questions there, really. How much better can Iranian-US relations get, since those issues don't seem like they're going to be resolved anytime soon? Right, that's the first kind of question.
The deal was not about grand bargain between Iran and the US. The deal was only limited to nuclear issue. For any reason which I really don't understand, for a decade, Iranian nuclear issue was the national security threat number one of the United States. I really don't know why. Because Iran was member of NPT, Iran didn't have nuclear weapon. And since 2003, from 2003 to 2015, 10,000 man-day inspections from the International Atomic Energy Agency done in Iran always confirmed there is no evidence of any diversion in Iranian nuclear program toward bomb. If a country is member of NPT, does not have nuclear weapon, and there is no evidence of diversion toward weaponization, why should be the national security threat number one of the United States of America, the nuclear? I don't understand why. However, I respect the fact. The US decided to go for specific issue nuclear, to negotiate with Iran to resolve only one issue. I remember during even Ahmadinejad period, the Iranian nuclear team, they were inviting the world powers interlocutors to discuss the regional issues, not only the nuclear. But the US was not ready to discuss any other issue other than nuclear. Therefore, we are not supposed to resolve everything because of the nuclear. The US didn't want it. We are supposed to resolve the nuclear. It's agreed. Now we have to implement it. It is not Iranian-American differences are not only about Syria. It's about Iraq. It's about the regional US policy. It's about Yemen. It's about terrorism. It's about peace process. It's about weapons of mass destruction. We have a lot of differences. The JCPOA, the nuclear deal, has created a precedent that if the two countries, they want to negotiate seriously, they can find a solution to their differences. This is the fact. From 1979 revolution to 2013, they did not negotiate on the nuclear. From 2013 to 2015, they negotiated and they agreed. Finish. A win-win. A face-saving solution for the both parties. However, Iranians, they oppose the US regional policy because they believe for decades the US has supported corrupted dictators in Middle East.
Just as Iran supports Bashar al-Assad, which is
now we are coming to
the
Syria.
worst regime in the region.
We are coming to Syria. But the Iranian point of view, Samir, before revolution, supported Shah, a corrupted dictator. After revolution, supported Saddam's invasion of Iran. Supported Mubarak, a corrupted dictator for 30, 40 years.
29 and a half.
29 and a half. You are Egyptian, you know better than me the days even. But if you look at the US allies, they are, most of them, they are dictators, no democracy, no human right. This is one. The second reason Iranians, they are against the US regional policy is the US attacks. Attacking Libya, attacking Afghanistan, attacking Iraq. I mean, the military strike policy of the US. Coming to Syria, Syria, who is responsible?
I think it's fairly clear, you know. I mean, so in the early spring of 2011, after massive uprisings in Tunisia that led to the ouster of Ben Ali, after 18 days in Tahrir that led to the ouster of Mubarak, and after protests began in almost all other countries in the Arab world, with the exception of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, there was a peaceful uprising in Syria. In fact, they were students, young students, who started protesting in a non-sectarian way about freedom and about the end of this Bashar al-Assad dynasty, right? His father had become president in the early 1970s, and he brought us, unfortunately, the father-to-son succession scenario in the region. And then the regime used brutal force against the peaceful uprising. And I think this really does need to be kind of stated. This is an industrial killing machine, right? We don't know how many people have been killed in Syria. The estimates are between 250,000 to 450,000 people killed, making it the worst humanitarian disaster of the 21st century. 4.5, 5 million refugees at least, 2.5 in Turkey, 1 million in Iraq, 1 million and plus in Jordan. And how can Iran defend this regime?
First of all, when you mentioned the Arab Spring, the US supported until the last moment Mubarak and Ben Ali in Tunisia, but the people in the street, they changed the regime. There was no terrorist groups, there was no weapon to Egypt, there was no terrorist groups in Egypt. It was a peaceful demonstrations for about 2, 3, 4 months. Ultimately, it was the people who did the change, not the foreign countries. Before, I would discuss with you carefully Syria. But to understand Syria, we need to go back to really the Arab Spring issue and the other countries which you mentioned. Libya, the same problem, right? Iran had no interference in Libya, right? No one can claim Iran had interference in Libya. GCC countries, Arab countries, United States, Europe, they attacked. It is what many people, they have invited the US to attack Bashar al-Assad, to remove Assad. The US already did in Libya. Europeans, they did, without Iranian interference. Look at Libya today. Total mess. The heaven of terrorist groups. No government. Libya is helpless. Helpless. The US is not doing anything. Europeans, they do not doing anything. They have left Libya to terrorist groups. Iran had no interferences. Now we are coming to Syria. Yes, you are right. There was a peaceful demonstration. Assad reacted brutally. Right. But up to today, Samer, Assad is the legal government of Syria. You may argue the Syrian government is not legitimate. There is a big difference between legitimacy and the legal. Assad has representative in United Nations. United Nations, even up to today, recognize Assad government as representative government of Syria. What happened? Definitely there was a big mistake Assad did in reaction with the demonstrators. But Saudis, Qataris, GCC, Europeans, even at the beginning Americans, immediately they jumped in, they provided weapons, money to terrorist groups to topple Assad. All the killing, you say, the numbers, at least 50% of them have been killed by terrorist groups, financed, weaponed by Look at what Joe Biden said at Harvard just a year and a half ago. I think you have heard his statement at Harvard.
I read about it.
He publicly
He
said,
said a lot of things.
our problem is with our own allies. He mentioned United Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, and he publicly said they are providing weapon money to terrorist groups to topple Assad at any cost. Our problem is with our own allies. The fact is, there is a legal government in Syria. Those governments who have interfered illegally without any international legal permission to provide weapons. Everyone knows ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra, from Turkey border to Syria, from money, weapon, women, logistic, everything. They did everything. Assad is fighting actually today the terrorist groups for years and years. It was not supposed, other countries which you mentioned in Arab Spring, nobody interfered by money, weapon, pouring the terrorist groups to bring the government down. It was left Tunisia. It was just by the people. Who gave permission to those countries, Saudi Arabia, GCC, the others, to export terrorist groups, to send weapons, money, to bring the country in such a mess? Of course, Assad would defend its country. When you say Assad is not Democrat,
I didn't say that, you did, but it's clear.
No, I'm not going really to argue about it.
Yeah. But, I mean,
because we don't have many, most of the countries in Middle East, they are not democratic. I mean, it is not something we can discuss in the Middle East about it. But you tell me, Samer, what is, if Assad is minority, when in Bahrain, a majority of 80% Shia uprising against a minority of 10-15% Sunni. And they have reacted brutally, killed, arrested Shia. 80% of the population of Bahrain is Shia. And the Saudi Arabia invaded militarily. And this is for 5 years occupied Bahrain with military against the will of 80%. Over there, the US, UN, Europeans, everybody says nothing. It comes to Syria, they say Alawites are minority, they are right. Sunnis are majority, they are right. Minority is ruling, they are right. But the double standard is clear. It is not because of minorities ruling majority. It is not because of democracy. It is because Assad had different policies with Saudis, Qataris, GCC, Americans, they didn't like it. When you are coming to terrorists, you mentioned Hezbollah. The US blame on Iran supporting terrorists is all about jihadi groups fighting Israel. It is about Hamas. It is about Hezbollah. Palestinian-Israeli issue is another issue. But today, the terrorist #1 threat recognized by international community, recognized by the US, recognized by Europeans, is ISIS, is Al-Qaeda, is Jabhat al-Nusra, Boko Haram. We have many terrorist groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Ahrar al-Sham, Boko Haram, Jabhat al-Nusra, all of them, they are coming from one school of thought, Wahhabism. The center is Saudi Arabia. I'm sure you have read the leaked documents Hillary Clinton, New York Times, just published saying that Saudi Arabia is the source number one funding terrorists. I'm sure you read Trump saying Saudi Arabia is the most dangerous country. You should not laugh because Oklahoma is going to vote for Trump.
I don't think the group assembled here, but
I mean,
that's
Trump,
another matter.
I'm talking about the two president candidates.
Yeah.
Clinton, Hillary said Saudi Arabia is source number one, supporting the terrorists. Trump said the same. Obama said the same in interview with Atlantic. Therefore, everyone understands the biggest threat today, bringing the whole Middle East in a total collapse, is the terrorist groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of them in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in everywhere, Libya, everywhere, doing all these explosions, terrorist activities in the US, in Europe, and the source is the US ally, Saudi Arabia, and now you are blaming Iran for what?
Well, no, just a couple of points. I mean, just to kind of set the record straight a little bit for people who might not know the history. I mean, there were months and months and months of peaceful demonstrations, of Friday demonstrations across Syria, the Solidarity Committee, Silmiya, peaceful, no weapons, and so on. And they were met by overwhelming force by the Syrian regime. And in fact, it was the Syrian regime's interests to change this conflict from one of being people wanting democracy and freedom and elections and so on a non-sectarian basis into a sectarian civil war for all different kinds of reasons, to wed the minority communities to him. And they did that successfully. So that's the first point, not to go on too long.
No, we should respect some. We should respect the will of Syrian nation.
I agree with
no
you.
doubt about it.
I agree with you that there are all kinds of dastardly states in the region. And certainly, you know, Saudi Arabia is very high on the list. In fact, Saudi Arabia and Iran are always competing in terms of the number of people executed each year, right? It's always a kind of contest, you know. But it's a completely different scale of what is going on in Bahrain, which is terrible, to what is going on in Syria. I mean, the figures, even if you accept the low figure of 250, 300,000 people being killed, the vast majority of them by the regime, using barrel bombs and other kinds of things, there's no way that one can defend the Iranian support of this regime. And the other interesting, just to stop here, you know, it's interesting, if you looked at public opinion in the Arab world
but you
in
would
2000,
support the Saudi support
I'm very critical of the Saudi regime and of the Mubarak regime. I'm for human rights and the people and Bernie Sanders. I'm not for, you know, any government, you know. So, but the point is though, you know, look at Iran's standing in the region from 2003, 2005 to today. In 2006, believe it or not, Ahmadinejad had a very high popularity rating in the Arab Middle East for all different kinds of reasons. Support for Hezbollah, support for Hamas, and so on. Today,
slogans against Israel brought a lot of popularity for him.
Iran's popularity in the region is at, you know, historic lows. So it hasn't done Iran any good in that front as well. And I think that, you know, without talking about the bad things that other countries are doing, the Syrian situation is a serious blemish, would be an understatement with regard to. But there are all kinds of other
we have
questions.
The same situation, Samer, to be frank, worse than, if not worse than Syria, at least very bad, is the Saudi invasion of Yemen, killing every day hundreds of innocent Yemenis. Tens of thousands of Yemenis
The
have been
Saudis are
killed.
certainly doing all kinds of dastardly things. Today we're speaking about Iran, I think. But the Saudis are, you know, there's no question, targeting civilians indiscriminately, bombing with the support of the United States, and so on. And that leads us in a way to Yemen, since we're, you know, you broached the question of Yemen. And of course, it is not known, or there's a great deal of speculation about how much support Iran has given the Houthis in Yemen, who you know, outed or ousted the president more than a year ago, and so on. And so, is it the case that Iran and Saudi Arabia, and of course regional tensions are very, very high, but in Yemen, is it the case that this is a proxy war, and that the Iranians are supporting the Houthis to damage or bleed the Saudis, and the Saudis are worried about Iranian influence in its neighboring?
It is at least what the Saudis they are thinking. But you are Egyptian, Samer, you know the history of Houthis and Zaydis very well in Yemen. 99% of Americans, they don't know really what is the story.
And the history of failed military adventures in
For
Yemen as well.
1,000 years, Zaydis and Houthis, they were ruling Yemen for 1,000 years. In early 1960s, Egypt attacked Zaydis Houthis to remove them. Saudis supported Zaydis and Houthis against the invasion of Egypt. Today, Saudis are attacking the same attacks before revolution, before Islamic Republic, Egypt did in early 1960s to remove Houthis. Therefore, Houthis, they are not a group, a proxy group. They have been ruling Yemen for 1,000 years. Just from early 1960s, they were removed from the power. They have been fighting for the power to come back to power for 40, 50 years, and they got it. It has really nothing to do with Iran. Of course, Iranians, they are supporting, no doubt about it. But the story of Yemen is very, very, very different. However, I think we have problem in Yemen, we have problem in Syria, we have problem in Bahrain, we have problem in Libya, everywhere. We have problem in Iraq. The fact is the Middle East is at the verge of collapse. The fact is that the terrorist groups are going to rule more lands if the current situation continues. And the fact is Iran and Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Turkey, they are four major powers, regional powers. We need to agree on some legitimate principles as crisis management in Middle East between the big international powers and the big regional powers. To my understanding, we need to agree on these principles. One, no disintegration in the region. The total integrity of every country should be kept, whether this is Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Yemen or Saudi Arabia or any other country, because the disintegration would continue to the other countries. Second, the will of majority through a healthy election supervised by United Nations in the crisis countries, including Syria. We should really leave to Syrian nation, to Yemeni's nation, to decide about their future, their constitution, their president. And the election should be supervised by United Nations, because we don't have governments, regimes in these countries which we can rely or acceptable to international communities. Third principle should be the power sharing in every of these countries, because we have in Bahrain, we have majority of Shia. In Syria, we have majority of Sunni. In Iraq, we have majority of Shia. In Yemen, we have majority of Sunni. Therefore, we need to have power sharing system. Minority really cannot rule majority. If we can agree on 4 principles between the regional powers and the international powers, the first would be diplomacy, not war. Attacking, because many they have invited the U.S. to attack Syria. I mean, all attacks by the U.S. we have seen the consequences. Everyone knows what is the consequences of U.S. attack on Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. And diplomacy, like what they did on Iranian nuclear crisis. Second, I would say, is leave the future of the country to the people through a peaceful, healthy election, supervised by United Nations in every country with no exception. We cannot have double standard. We cannot support the rule of minority in one country and fight the rule of minority in another country. It's not going to go. And third, we need really to agree power sharing. In Iraq, the problem of Iraq today is terrorists. Otherwise, they have had election. The international community have recognized it was healthy election. The prime minister is Shia. 65% of Iraqis, they are Shia. The Speaker of Parliament is Sunni. 10, 15, 20% of Iraqis, they are Sunni. The president is Kurd. It is a type of power sharing with election, with constitution. They have constitution, everything. And then we would need a type of Marshall Plan for these countries to help the reconstruction, the poverty, the humanitarian help, refugees, displaced. If we can have the 5 big powers and at least the 4 regional powers to sit together first to agree on the principles, to avoid the double standards, then to cooperate together. Of course, the 5th principle should be definitely unanimously to fight the terrorist groups with no discriminations.
I know that many people in the audience probably have questions that they'd like to ask, and I'm going to invite you to raise your hands, and a microphone will be given to you after I broach one last topic, and that is, of course, we couldn't have a discussion of Iran, I think, without touching upon the current situation in Iran domestically. I'm sure people will want to ask politically, but I'm interested in the state of freedom in Iran, or lack of freedom in Iran right now. You know, what has happened? I mean, we thought that after President Rouhani's victory, that there would be a kind of opening up, you know, a kind of, let's say, Tehran spring, and so on. But it doesn't seem that that's happened. I mean, if you look at any of the reports, Amnesty and so on, they say that, you know, there really hasn't been an improvement in the human rights situation. Most Americans and Europeans, of course, are conscious of the Iranian dual nationals who end up in Iranian prisons, whether it was, you know, the Washington Post reporter who spent a year or so in Iranian prison, or Haleh Esfandiari in Washington. But of course, Iranians also are not doing so well, some of them who are bloggers and social media activists and journalists and so on. So what's the situation? And you've yourself had experienced some of this. What is the situation in terms of domestic freedoms in Iran today? And should one be hopeful, or should one be guarded a little bit?
It's important to know that 36 years after revolution, Iran has had 37 elections. Only one was disputed. Iran has constitution. Parliament is elected directly by people.
If you're approved as a legitimate candidate, right?
Yeah, but anyhow, you can see today Parliament, which was just some month ago, we have 30% in the Parliament conservatives, 30% reformists, 30% independent. It is not 90% conservatives. You can see the election. But Parliament is elected directly by people. President is elected directly by people. And the leader is elected indirectly by people. All decision makers, institutions are elected. We have a separate parliament is assembly of experts. The people, they elect 80 people to decide about the leader, to dismiss, to appoint, whatever. Like Europeans, they have the party who has majority in parliament can nominate the chancellor or prime minister. The chancellor of Germany is not elected directly by people. He is decided by parliament, but is indirectly elected. This is important to know really the difference between Iran and some other countries in the region, which you know better than me, which they don't have constitution, they don't have election. The president is not elected, Amir is not elected, parliament they don't have even, I mean, it's a big difference. One. Second, if you tell me the human rights situation in Iran is ideal, I would say no. We have a lot of problems. I myself am a sample. But you cannot compare Iranian human rights democracy situation with many, many countries in the region. It is really much better than many of them. However, the Iranian domestic situation, believe me, is very much similar to the US domestic situation. The two big parties, Republicans and Democrats, we have in Iran conservatives, principalists, whatever you want to call it, Republicans, I mean, Democrats or moderates or reformists, whatever you want. We have two major fractions fighting for 36 years to gain power. Rafsanjani was a moderate president, elected by people. Khatami was a reformist president, elected by people. Ahmadinejad was a conservative president, elected by people. The first term, at least everyone accepted. The dispute was about the second term. Rouhani is a moderate, elected by people. Just we had the two big elections some month ago. One was Assembly of Experts, who decides about the leader, and the National Parliament, which was completely healthy. No one disputed, and the result was also fair, a balance in the National Parliament. The big fight has started already on the presidential elections. We have in June, and some of the human rights issues are occurring in Iran is because of domestic political fightings, which I really don't like it. Right. And I hope one day they would be able to compete each other in a better way, rather than to accusing each other, arresting, putting in jail the opponents, you know.
Okay. Well, I think now it's probably a good time to open questions from the floor. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and then someone with a microphone will, if you could make your question short, also introduce yourself, I think that would be greatly appreciated.
Sure.
Professor Kimball.
I'm Charles Kimball, Director of Religious Studies program here at OU. A lot of attention in recent days to the beginning of Hajj. Iran is not allowing people to go on the Hajj because of the conflict and what happened last year. Can you tell us from the Iranian perspective what happened last year, what's going on now, and some of the fallout of leaders in Saudi Arabia saying Shiites aren't really Muslims?
I really welcome what he says because the type of Islam Mufti Saudis they have, of course, Iranians, they are not that type of Muslim. I mean, these Wahhabis, which everyone in the world, including 95% of Sunnis, they are afraid of them. They are very, very, very different with the school of thought of Muftis, Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia. Egypt is not like that. Yemen is not like that. Majority of Sunnis, they are not like that. Shia is not like that. If he says we are different, definitely we are different, and we are proud to be different. It was not Iranian government not letting the citizens to go to Saudi Arabia. They could not agree because Iranians, you remember about 15, 20 years ago, 400 Iranians, they were killed in Saudi Arabia. And then we had the really unbelievable event during the last year. Thousands of Iranians, they were killed during the Hajj ceremony. During the Hajj ceremony, because of the crowd, because of about 8,000 Iranians, they were killed or injured. And for this year, Iranian government negotiated with Saudis to protect the safety and security of Iranian pilgrims. They wanted assurances from the Saudi government that they would protect. And Saudis, they were not ready to give any type of assurances. Then Tehran said, okay, we would forego. But the issue really between Iran and Saudi is far beyond the Hajj issue. And we are in the worst situation ever in the relation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Clearly in a Cold War, clearly between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we are in very, very dangerous situation. From the Iranian point of view, after revolution, I mean, I understand why Saudis, they are very angry and they have lost their patience. After revolution, they supported Saddam with tens of billions of dollars to disintegrate Iran. They failed. Then they created Taliban in Afghanistan to rule Afghanistan. 9/11 happened. Iran and US, both enemies, they cooperated, they removed Taliban from Afghanistan. Saudis, they got mad of Iran-US cooperation to remove Taliban from Afghanistan. Then the US attacked Iraq. Saddam, the guarantor of the rule of minority of Sunnis for decades in Iraq, removed. Iranians tacitly cooperated to remove Saddam. And then the majority of Shia, 65%, they got opportunity to get role in ruling Iraq, which Saudis, they are extremely angry of US doing this. Then Arab Spring happened. Their ally Mubarak collapsed, Ben Ali collapsed, they were very much afraid. Then Bahrain happened. Then Syria happened, and they, if you remember, they said Assad must go, and they believed Assad would go in just 2 months. 5 years Assad is there, they have failed. Then they attacked Yemen, and they have failed. It is 2 years. They have really failed. They believed they would attack Yemen and they would resolve Yemen in 1 week. Then they didn't like the nuclear deal. They did everything to push the US to attack Iran before the nuclear deal. The US didn't. They did everything to prevent the nuclear deal. The US didn't listen. That's why, I mean, if you go back to 36 years, they have done everything to undermine Iran, to bring regime change in Iran, to disintegrate Iran, to put pressure and sanctions. Suddenly, a country under the most comprehensive sanctions, Iran, for 36 years, is, if not the most powerful, is one of the most stable, powerful countries in the region. And this is that's why Saudis, they have really lost their patience. But the way they are going is wrong. I think they are weakening themselves. They are really pouring their assets. They are creating long-term hostility with Yemenis because what they are doing now in Yemen, even if there is a peace in Yemen, Yemenis, which have been killed, tens of thousands of Yemenis and lost everything, they are not going to leave Saudi Arabia. They are planting their long-term hostility with their own neighbor. When they are fighting 80% of majority, 80% of Shia in Bahrain, it is not the right policy they are doing. I think at the end, the international community also should help Iran and Saudi Arabia to sit together because they are two big regional powers. And we are not going to have peace and stability in the region without cooperation between the big powers, specifically, always I say, Iran, Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia.
So, very good. Another question. Just before, so the figure you presented in terms of the number of Iranians who were killed in the stampede, you think 8,000 because
800, sorry.
800.
800.
Okay, 800 because the
No, 800, sorry.
800. Yeah. Okay. Negligence on the part of the Saudis, still a huge number, and other nationalities were killed, and it wasn't the first time.
Yeah, it was
that there
not
was
Iran.
negligence.
It was totally was about some thousand.
Total, probably, yeah. And
Yeah.
in fact, there was a crane that collapsed earlier and so on that killed people, but the figure is in. Okay, another question.
Hello, my name's Blake Miller. I'm a freshman here at OU. And I was just wondering, you talked about Iran becoming self-sufficient with the nuclear power. Would the one nuclear power plant that they wanted in back between the 2000s and 1990s, would that have made Iran self-sufficient?
No, when I say self-sufficiency, they needed fuel for the only power plant. And they were ready, they were begging for 15 years to get fuel from international market rather than to have enrichment in Iran. They didn't want to have it. I was negotiating for 10 years. When Europeans, Americans declined to give fuel to Iran from international market and closed all markets, then Iranians had no choice to go to produce fuel inside Iran, which is enrichment. By enrichment, you can have fuel. This is what I say about self-sufficiency. Yes, they are going to have more nuclear power plants. They have signed another 2 new nuclear power plants with Russia. And they are going to have about 8 more. And you should know the other countries like Saudi Arabia, like Turkey, like Emirates, they have signed also the same agreement to have nuclear power plants. Emirates, they have signed agreement to have 4 nuclear power plants. I don't know Turkey how many, but they are also about 10, 15, 20. Like the other countries also, they are all signing to have nuclear power plant because they want diversity in the energy.
There's a question up there. Okay.
Thank you for coming. You have given us a lot of history and a lot of facts. I'd like for you to do a little speculation. If you could wave your magic wand and get rid of the Revolutionary Guard and the Wahhabis, what do you think the region would look like? And do you see any possible glimmer of hope that we might diminish those influences?
First of all, about Wahhabis, really, it is not something Iran can do it. I hope you have read Obama's interview with Atlantic. He said for decades, for 40, 50 years, they have poured tens of billions of dollars to educate youth. And we have hundreds of thousands of Wahhabis educated through all madrasas in Pakistan, in Africa. If anything can be done, it should be done by the world powers to prevent the financing of terrorist groups, education of extremism. They should do it. Revolutionary Guard in Iran, without Revolutionary Guard, Iran would have been completely disintegrated. Very frankly speaking with you as an Iranian. Every Iranians know. When Saddam attacked Iran, the Iranian army, Shah army, was in very, very weak situation because the commanders, they left the country. There was not organized army. And that's why Saddam, within 3 days, could come to Khorramshahr, Abadan, could capture a lot of territory in Iran because the army was completely unorganized and was not ready to defend. That's why the late Iranian supreme leader called on people to go voluntarily to the front to defend the invasion of the country. Tens of thousands of youth with no military education experiences, they went. This was the story of foundation of Revolutionary Guard. During the war, it was founded. And Iran could resist the invasion. Iran could defeat Saddam. Iran could kick out Saddam out of the country. Iran could keep the integrity only and only because of Revolutionary Guard. Of course, the army could make up itself immediately after some months. Army played a big role also. But army knows without Revolutionary Guard, Iran today would have been completely disintegrated. Revolutionary Guard is part of Iranian army, madam. You know, Revolutionary Guard is an official army of Iran. Air forces, ground forces, sea forces, like every other army. You cannot tell a country to dismantle your army, but you can negotiate on the policies. What we need, because as I said, we have a lot of differences. The differences are there. We need the political willing of both parties to sit together like the nuclear issue and to discuss what would be the face-saving solution. What are the red lines for this side? What are the red lines for the other side? And to agree on the bottom line of each side.
Just to follow up on this, and then we'll go to another question. I think maybe one of the intentions behind the question is it's always seemed to me that, you know, you can say, okay, there's some similarity between the Republicans and the Democrats in this country, but in one sense, there's no similarity because the situation in Iran, if one looks at the kind of organizational map of the Iranian state, and you see the supreme leader and the Majlis and the elected president and the guidance council and so on, it seems that the Revolutionary Guard is the hammer of the supreme leader. In other words, there's a kind of lack of coherence in terms of, or conflicts within the state itself. The Republican Democrat is about a contest about the state and about decision-making and about resources. But in Iran, it seems, even if we look at the official
No, Samir,
pronouncements...
from perhaps you are right. There is a difference between the function of army in the U.S. and the function of army in Iran. But you need to understand the Iranian situation. Iran is surrounded by military, the U.S. military army, all around the borders. Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Turkey, NATO, Iraq. Iran is completely surrounded by the U.S. Army.
Iraq, not anymore.
One, no, still there, still there. Second, the U.S., the West has pursued for 36 years regime change in Iran, at least for 30 years. I would say the second term of Obama was different. I myself believe Obama was not after regime change. That's why we could make a deal. For 3 decades, the most comprehensive draconian sanctions ever against a nation has been imposed on Iranians. Therefore, the Revolutionary Guard is not just simply an army who should defend the borders, because they are feeling threats from the neighbors, Europe, US, for decades, economically, politically, cyber war. Their nuclear scientists, they have been assassinated in Tehran street, you know it. That's why the army needs to go a little bit, the Revolutionary Guard, to keep the country or revolution or the system, is the guard of the system. If there is such a grand bargain, if the threats are removed, then perhaps the function would be different. But you cannot really compare the function of Iranian army with the U.S. army, because the U.S. is not threatened by it's a big difference.
We had a question over here, I think. Or maybe up there, I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
Hello, I'm Jake Perry. I'm a student at Norman High School just up the street. And I was wondering, several times in your responses you've mentioned Turkey as one of the major players in Middle Eastern politics. And of course, with the recent coup attempt and Erdogan's seizing of increasingly authoritarian powers and crackdowns on the Kurds and whatnot, just what exactly are Iranian attitudes towards Turkey at that time? And what kind of views do you have for Turkey as in the future of the Middle East, and especially in Syria?
If you look at the Middle East from top, you would see 3 nations, big nations with history, civilization, and huge human resources: Iran, Egypt, Turkey. And the 2 big civilizations of the history of mankind is Iranians and Egyptians. Of course, Turks also they have. That's why for Iran, relation with Turkey is very important, and the same for Turkey. For 400 years, Iran and Turkey, they have lived in peace, no war. The differences between the 2 countries occurred on the Syrian issue. And it was really the only major issue between Iran and Turkey during last 4 or 5 years. Recently, the leaders of both countries, they have decided to fill the gap. and to minimize the tension over Syria. Iran was among the first countries condemning the coup and supported Erdogan, despite of the differences in Syria. And Ankara is extremely thankful to Tehran's position because Iran did not mix everything together. Immediately, right away, called Erdogan and they told Erdogan, we are ready to help comprehensively as much as you need on every dimension aspect. That's up to you. You tell us, we would do everything. And there has been high-level visits recently between Iran and Turkey. I believe they are trying to minimize the tension, and the economic relation is 20-30 billion dollars. It is Iran, you know, is exporting its gas to Turkey, and there are a lot of strategic, economic, political, security issues. They have the common position on courts and many other issues. That's why I believe they would remain friendly and they would try everything to have close relation.
There's a question here. Yes. Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Harrison Smith, and I'm studying economics here at OU. I think a lot of our questions have been very conflict-centric, but just from an economic standpoint, I was wondering, what does it look like geopolitically, the landscape for Iran and the wider Middle East with lessened reliance on natural or on fossil fuels?
I think there would be big new changes because as far as I understand, I hope I'm not wrong, the US is getting completely independent soon from oil and gas of the Persian Gulf. And they are trying to have a new strategy moving toward from Middle East to East Asia because the big rivalries of the US in coming decades would not be Middle East, would be China, India. I mean, the big powers, the four big powers in Asia. That's why they are going to take care of their main rivalries. And if the current crisis in Middle East continues, I'm afraid we would have big problems for exporting oils from the Middle East, Persian Gulf, because the crisis is spilling over from one country to another country. I mean, look at Iraq situation, look at Libya situation, and look at the ISIS, which now holds many fields of oil, and this is a terrorist group which have land, money, weapon, oil, everything, you know. If they continue in this way, then I really don't know what's going to happen to the future of energy worldwide. And there should be a new policies. I mean, I hope OPEC, I hope the United Nations Security Council, I hope the industrial countries, they would do some initiative in order to guard the healthy export of oil from the Persian Gulf, from Middle East to outside of the region. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know what they're going to do.
You had a question, and you were missed by our.
With regard to the ongoing Syrian war. What is the level of involvement and cooperation what is the level of involvement with respect to and cooperation with respect to Russia and Iran?
Iran and Bashar Assad.
Russia.
Iran and Russia
in
on
the
Syria or
prosecution of on Syria.
They are
then,
cooperating because they have the same policy.
Right.
I mean,
But is there a level of military cooperation and planning and sharing of logistics?
the
and
main
weapons?
military operation in Syria is from Russia, not from Iran. Iranians, they have some generals, some military as advisors, but they don't have forces. They don't have air strike like Russia, and they don't have military base in Syria. They are cooperating with Syrian army, they are cooperating with Russian army, because from the Iranian point of view and the Russian point of view, you are to choose between Assad and ISIS in the future of Syria. Because really the moderate opposition which we have, they are really, really weak. The main force today in Syria fighting each other, one side is Assad, army, and the security establishments of Syria. By the way, Assad is secular. And I always have said it is really irony that Iranian is supporting a secular government in Syria, and the US is supporting a religious government to bring a religious government in Syria. I mean, I don't understand this issue. However, the main forces are fighting today are, one side is the government, military, and the security establishment under Assad. And the other side are the terrorist groups, mainly ISIS, and second Jabhat al-Nusra, and Al-Qaeda, and there are some different more. For the future of Syria, if you want to maintain, to preserve the integrity of Syria, if you want to prevent Syria from collapsing as a state and as a nation, you need to cooperate with Assad army security establishment to fight to delete Syria from these terrorist groups. It's not going to happen. Iranians and Russians are doing this. But the US still is not on board. The US has changed its policy toward Assad. They are not emphasizing on Assad must go. The Europeans also, after the terrorist events in Europe, they understand the danger and threat of exporting terrorism from Syria and Iraq to Europe, which would really disable European cities and countries. Now they are meeting Assad, Brits they have met, France they are meeting. I think in this process, we need to have a parallel compromise between Iranian, Russian, American, Europeans, and even Saudis. Without Saudis, we are not going to solve, because they are the one who are giving the main money and weapon to these terrorist groups. One is to cooperate with Assad to maintain integrity, unity of Syria, to prevent the collapse of Syrian army and Syrian security establishments, which would be disaster. US believes in this issue. Europeans, they believe that they should prevent the collapse of military and security establishment, to fight terrorist groups. But in the future, in order to satisfy the other side, which is GCC, Saudi Arabia, the US, we should have a real free election, as I said, supervised by United Nations, to leave it to Syrian people.
How in the world can you do that when
Iran has agreed with this.
they have refugees, everyone's fled the country?
No, we need to, I mean, we need really a master plan. You are right, we need a master plan. I mean, if we agree on the elements which I said, the other elements would be the humanitarian help to bring them back to their countries. We would need a small Marshall Plan, billions of dollars to revive the Syrian economy. We have to do a lot, but on principles, for the future, whether Assad should rule Syria or not, Iranians already, they have agreed, and Russians, that if the integrity, unity of Syria is preserved, if the security establishments and military are preserved from the total collapse, if terrorists are defeated, then they would support a complete free election, not supervised by Assad, not held by Assad, by the United Nations, for the Syrian nation to decide about their future. I believe this is the only way to go. Otherwise, if Assad leaves today, believe me, very frankly speaking, Syria would be another Libya. No one would be able to manage Syria. No one. Because immediately after Assad leaves, the security establishment and the military establishments, they would collapse. Like what happened in Libya. After that, neither Saudi Arabia, nor GCC, nor the US, nor European, nobody can do anything. Then the terrorists, they would go everywhere. They would do whatever they want, like what they are doing in Libya. Nobody is taking care of Libya.
Sure, we have a question here in the front.
Well, thank you. It is now like an hour and a half, so thank you. And my question is, you mentioned that maybe the biggest threat for the world, for the Middle East at least, is now ISIS, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But the role of other groups has always been marginalized. And the way I actually see things, at least partially, is that one big reason why ISIS is taking so much ground is that the national armies, specifically of Iraq and Syria, have been infiltrated by different militia groups. Most of them are Iranian or Iranian backed, supported by Iran. Asayib al-Haq, Faylaq Badr, Fatimiyun, Al-Fadl al-Abbas, etc. The last time I counted were about 17. So when there is this type of alliance between paramilitary groups, whose members are also coming from different parts of the region, not only Iraqis, not only Syrians, they form alliances with the national army of the country, then this is going to lead to biases. And then the trust of the people in their national army is going to collapse. How else would you, for example, explain?
This is exactly, my friend, what the Americans, what Europeans, what Saudis, they are discussing with Iraqi government. And Iraqi government and establishment, they are insisting, without Iraqi militia, the Iraqi army is not capable to fight ISIS. They lost the territory because the military was so weak and disorganized. ISIS could win Iraq because of the weakness of the military, the Iraqi army, which got tens of billions of dollars of support of the US for weapon and education and everything. After they lost the territory in Iraq, after the Iraqi army was really weak to fight ISIS, then they decided to invite people, the militia. Militia, they are the people, normal people, to come to help the army. The recent achievements in Iraq is because of the militia. That's why now the US is not emphasizing a lot as a red line on the militia, because CENTCOM now, I understand, without militia, Iraq is gone. And this is the same. I mean, they have tried to have the same militia in Syria to help the Syrian army to fight these terrorist groups.
Go ahead, Professor.
What I just wanted to say is that I think that maybe what you think about this is that the infiltration of the national army, which before 2003 for Iraq was brutal, yes, but was for all Iraq. Now, when you have militia groups who are mostly supported by Iran, then the military for the Iraqi person is not for the whole country, it's for a certain group. So that actually, the way I say it is that this is as dangerous as ISIS. That is my point.
No, perhaps the solution would be to help the use of youth in Iraq as militia to help to support the Iraqi army during the fight with ISIS. When Iraqis, they have regained all territory, ISIS is kicked out, then leave everything to the Iraqi army. But today, Iraqi army accepts that they cannot alone fight ISIS. CENTCOM understand, Europeans, they understand, Iraqi government understand that the Iraqi army alone cannot fight ISIS. This is the problem today. But if they can delete ISIS from Iraq, whether in the future the militia would have a role, this could be a part of negotiation about the future to help Iraqi army to become more strengthful, to be able to defend Iraq.
Okay, last question, and we'll have this gentleman here in the second row.
Hi, I'm Yusuf. I'm from Egypt, and I'm a freshman here at OU. And I was just wondering about when you were mentioning the internal situation in Iran, there was no mention whatsoever of the religious situation, whether it was religious freedom or how certain religions were treated. And as a theocratic government from 1979 up until now, there have been major problems concerning religious freedom and how certain sects of religion were related. A point in case is the Baha'i faith, for example, which has been awfully mistreated by the Baha'i government up until this day, as well as other people who identify as irreligious, whether it's atheists or agnostic or so on. So how has it changed?
The issue is about the Constitution. Constitution established in 1980, I think, right after the revolution. They recognized the religions, Shia, Sunni, Christians, Armenians, and Jews, recognized as religions.
Zoroastrians?
Yeah. They all have representative in Iranian parliament. Iranian parliament is the only parliament in the world which by constitution should have representative from Armenian, Jews, Zoroastrians, all of them. Otherwise, Jews are 20,000. By number, you should have 100,000 in order to have minimum 100,000 to have one representative. Jews are 20,000, and they have 2 representatives. Therefore, there is no problem about Jews, about Christians, about Armenians. You have never heard Zoroastrians. Baha'is are not considered from the Iranian constitution, laws and regulations as religion. That's why they don't have the rights to be active as religion. They have the rights to live as citizen, Iranian citizen. But they are not recognized by constitution as religion.